Hey everybody, I wanted to do another video on the Kanika Jenkins case, and this one I wanted to do on hypothermia because that's what the medical examiner listed as her cause of death, her primary cause of death. And I found this story, I want to do this fair use right here because this is going to be an educational video and I'm going to use it as a teaching point on outsideonline.com, which I believe is a podcast as well. This is a story called Frozen Alive, story by Peter Stark, sorry. And I found this very interesting. It's a story about a man that's driving. We could listen to it, but I would rather just read the pieces that are relevant to what I'm speaking about. He's driving and ends up off the road. But he's talking about hypothermia, and he's hitting these key points that happen at certain body temperatures. It says there's no precise core temperature at which the human body perishes from cold. At Dachau's cold water immersion baths, Nazi doctors calculated death to arrive at around 77 degrees Fahrenheit. The lowest recorded core temperature in a surviving adult is 60.8 degrees. For a child, it's lower. In 1994, a 2-year-old girl in Saskatchewan wandered out of her house into a minus 40 degrees night. She was found near her doorstep the next morning, limbs frozen solid. Her core temperature was 57 degrees and she lived. But for all scientists and statisticians, not, oh goodness, here we go today, now know of freezing and its physiology. No one can yet predict exactly how quickly and in whom hypothermia will strike, and whether it will kill when it does. The cold remains a mystery, more prone to fell men than women, more lethal to the thin and well-muscled than to those with avoirdupois, and least forgiving to the arrogant and the unaware. So he goes through these body temperatures, and it's really interesting. I'm going to scan through here. Of course, you can pull this up anytime you want. It says your temperature begins to plummet within 17 minutes. It reaches the normal 98.6. It says at 97 degrees, the muscles along your neck and shoulders tighten in what's known as pre-shivering muscle tone. Sensors have signaled the temperature control center in your hypothalamus, which if you are familiar with the Kanika Jenkins case, the thalamus is very important as she did not have one in the autopsy, which in turn has ordered the constriction of the entire web of surface capillaries. Your hands and feet begin to ache with cold. Another 10 minutes pass. Let's see, it says at 95, you've entered the zone of mild hypothermia. You're now trembling violently as your body attains its maximum shivering response as an involuntary condition in which your muscles contract rapidly to generate additional body heat. Your heat begins to drain away at an alarming rate, your head alone accounting for 50% of the loss. That's why my grandmother used to tell me all the time not to go outside with a wet head. But that's where your body heat mainly stays. Let's see. Okay, here we go. With every 1 degree drop in body temperature below 95, your cerebral metabolic rate falls off by 3 to 5%. When your core body temperature reaches 93, amnesia nibbles at your consciousness. This is in the minus 35 degree air. Your core temperature falls about 1 degree every 30 to 40 minutes. Your body heat leaching out into the soft enveloping snow. Apathy at 91 degrees. Stupor at 90. By the time your core temperature has fallen to 88 degrees, your body has abandoned the urge to warm itself by shivering. Your blood is thickening like crankcase oil in a cold engine. Your oxygen consumption, a measure of your metabolic rate, has fallen by more than a quarter. Your kidneys, however, work overtime to process the fluid overload that occurred when the blood vessels in your extremities constricted and squeezed fluids towards your center. You feel a powerful urge to urinate, the only thing you feel at all. By 87 degrees, you've lost the ability to recognize a familiar face, should one suddenly appear from the woods. At 86 degrees, your heart, its electrical impulses hampered by chilled nerve tissues, becomes arrhythmic. It now pumps less than two-thirds the normal amount of blood. The lack of oxygen and the slowing metabolism of your brain, meanwhile, begin to trigger visual and auditory hallucinations. Attempting to stand, you collapse in a tangle of skis and poles. At 85 degrees, those freezing to death, in a strange anguish paroxysm, often rip off their clothes. This phenomenon, known as paradoxical undressing, is common enough that urban hypothermia victims are sometimes initially diagnosed as victims of sexual assault. Though researchers are uncertain of the cause, the most logical explanation is that shortly before loss of consciousness, the constricted blood vessels near the body's surface suddenly dilate and produce a sensation of extreme heat against the skin. And then it says, you grasp your terrible misunderstanding, a whole series of misunderstandings, like a dream ratcheting into wrongness. You've shed your clothes, your car, your oil-heated house in town, blah, blah, blah. It's talking about his last moments there. Okay. At absolute zero, minus 459.67 degrees Fahrenheit, molecular motion ceases altogether. It is this slowing that converts gases to liquids, liquids to solids, and renders solids hard. It slows bacterial growth and chemical reactions. In the human body, cold shuts down metabolism. The lungs take in less oxygen, the heart pumps less blood. The chilled brain, having slowed its own metabolism, needs far less oxygen rich blood and can, under the right circumstances, survive intact. And then it talks about how he was warmed up and brought back. Since I do have a membership at study.com, I thought I would go to them and see what they had on hypothermia as well. It just says, what is hypothermia? Definition, causes, symptoms, and treatment. So we'll go straight to the definition. It says hypothermia is a drop in body temperature to dangerously low levels, usually as a result of prolonged exposure to the cold. It says normal body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think that has changed recently, like in the last couple of months, last month, and that is no longer the universal body temperature. Hypothermia is classified as body temperatures that drop below 95 degrees, because that's when the body stops functioning normally, when its temperature is too high or too low. It goes into cold weather. I wanted to get to the symptoms. Symptoms of hypothermia include those include commonly experienced when you're cold. These include shaking, shivering, nausea, increased heart rate or breathing, fatigue, lack of coordination, and difficulty thinking or speaking. And I think that's interesting. I just was thinking about this as I was reading it earlier, that if you think about the bizarre behavior that Kanika showed on the surveillance footage where she was walking around the hotel, and we know she didn't have that much alcohol in her system, and we also are pretty sure that Topamax didn't make that much of an effect on her and alcohol, and I've talked to several people that have taken Topamax and drank alcohol, and each one of them have said the same thing. They didn't even know that there was any difference. So I don't know how or why the topiramate, which I call Topamax, which is what that is, I don't know why that played such a big role. But anywho, I think about her when she's walking around the hotel where it says here, fatigue, lack of coordination, difficulty thinking. Could it be that she maybe was in the freezer at some point and she got out and then walked around the hotel? I really don't know. We don't know what happened in that freezer, honestly. We don't know if it happened in the pool and she was brought there. We don't really know, but we think we know. Anywho, I just thought about her in that instance and her behavior. And it says hypothermia can progress and symptoms will also intensify. Shivering may increase in intensity. Confusion or drowsiness may get more pronounced. The heart rate and breathing rate will slow down and speech will slow or stop. And the body may take on a slight blue appearance. Once it's reached its most intense stages, the person may lose consciousness, lose all sense of reality, and even believe that they are too warm, causing them to strip off their clothing in a misguided attempt at helping themselves. They are also at the risk of frostbite or gangrene if the blood flow stops. Then hypothermia will eventually cause the heart to fail and the person will pass away. Goes into treatment and then just summarizes the lesson. I wanted to go to this livescience.com or livescience.com. They had an article on there, Get Naked and Dig, the Bizarre Effects of Hypothermia. There's a gentleman who suffered from hypothermia. Kind of says the same thing, just about hypothermia. But this terminal burrowing is what I wanted to touch on. It's well known that warm-blooded, hibernating animals will often dig or burrow into a small enclosed den to spend the winter. The tight quarters surrounding their bodies can help to minimize heat loss. Humans, in the final throes of severe hypothermia, exhibit a somewhat similar behavior known to researchers as terminal burrowing. In a 1995 article in the International Journal of Legal Medicine, researchers from Germany described hypothermia victims, quote, in a position which indicated a final mechanism of protection, for example, under a bed, behind a wardrobe, in a shelf, etc. End quote. Terminal behavior isn't widely studied or well understood, but the German researchers described it as obviously an autonomous process of the brainstem, which is triggered in the final state of hypothermia, and produces a primitive and burrowing-like behavior of protection, as seen in hibernating animals. We went on to discuss paradoxical undressing. It says, as strange as the terminal burrowing behavior might seem, an act called paradoxical undressing is even more confounding. The term describes the behavior among many victims of extreme hypothermia of peeling off most or all of their clothing, increasing heat loss. And it says, researchers believe has nothing to do with paradoxical undressing. To shut down the loss of heat from the extremities, the body induces vasoconstriction, the reflexive contraction of blood vessels. Okay. The muscles necessary for inducing vasoconstriction become exhausted and fail, causing warm blood to rush from the core to the extremities. This results in a kind of hot flash that makes victims of severe hypothermia, who are already confused and disoriented, feel as though they're burning up, so they remove their clothes. Paradoxical undressing often occurs immediately before terminal burrowing. The researchers in Germany investigating hypothermia victims noted in the article that the final position in which the bodies were found could only be reached by crawling on all fours or flat on the body, resulting in abrasions to the knees, elbows, etc. This crawling happened after undressing, as there were abrasions to the skin but no damage to the corresponding parts of the removed clothing. If you think back to Kanika's body as the pictures depict it, you didn't really see that. You didn't see her in a fetal position. That's what makes it a little bizarre. You did see the shoe off and the abrasion to the ankle. It says hypothermia or crime. This is what was really interesting. Because of terminal burrowing and paradoxical undressing, victims of hypothermia have been misrepresented as victims of crime. Some police investigators have erroneously believed that a person who is naked and deceased is the victim of sexual assault and murder, and their discovery inside a small enclosed space, such as beneath furniture, looks like an attempt to hide the body. On Wednesday, December 4th, a woman's body was discovered in dense shrubbery in Rochelle Park, New Jersey, in a state of partial undress. In addition to articles of clothing, liquor bottles were found near her body. The woman was known to have abused alcohol. There were no signs of sexual assault. Overnight temperatures in the area were near the freezing point, and though a cause of death has yet to be confirmed, investigators have not ruled out paradoxical undressing and hypothermia. So, I thought that was an interesting scenario relating to this case. So then I went and found the article from the International Journal of Legal Medicine called Terminal Burrowing Behavior, a Phenomenon of Lethal Hypothermia. I can't speak today. This is the worst day not to be able to speak. It says, between 1978 and 1994, 69 cases of death due to lethal hypothermia were examined in their institute. 69 cases. In addition to the common findings associated with hypothermia, we especially wanted to examine the so-called paradox reaction, which refers to the undressing of persons in a state of severe, lethal hypothermia. This is obviously the result of peripheral vasodilation affecting a feeling of warmth. In our material, this paradoxical undressing occurred in 25% of the cases, and nearly all of those 25% of cases, it says, nearly all exhibited an additional phenomenon which has not yet been described in the literature. So of the 69 cases, the paradoxical undressing, happened in 25% of those cases. And then it says, and nearly all exhibited an additional phenomenon which has not yet been described in the literature. They were partial or complete. Nearly all bodies with partial or complete disrobement were found in a position which indicated a final mechanism of protection. This is obviously an autonomous process of the brainstem, which is triggered in the final state of hypothermia, and produces a primitive and burrowing-like behavior of protection, as seen in hibernating animals. And they termed that terminal burrowing behavior. And it occurred predominantly with slow decreases in temperature and moderately cold conditions. And I thought that was really interesting, that of the 69 cases, only 25% of those did the paradoxical undressing. Very, very interesting. And all of the bodies that had the paradoxical undressing were found in a position that indicated a final mechanism of protection. And that's just not a lot. When people say, oh, usually people, no, usually people don't. Only 25% of the cases that they studied did. So now you have that stat to go on. So it's not something that happens every time with hypothermia. And I just wanted to get that out. So that's pretty much all I have on hypothermia. I thought that would be useful so that now we know terminal burrowing and paradoxical undressing. Hope you guys have a good day.